and welcome to Race Streamer. Super excited to say that I'm here at Brands Hatch today. I'm going to be racing with Sam Mckee again, same drill as what we did at Alton Park, so I'm racing in MSV Trackday Trophy. So the expected plan for today is qualifying is in just under 2 hours at 11:30. That might be dry, it might be wet, we're not sure. So that will influence our tyre choice. And then the race will almost definitely be soaking wet, which is going to be at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Also worth mentioning, same as before, in terms of when we did the race at Alton Park, which is it's going to be a 45-minute race with a driver change sometime between 15 minutes to 30 minutes, which we're just going to decide upon. Depends on the night. We're kind of expecting a safety car in the race, to be fair, because it's wet and it's Brands, and someone's probably going to park it in the gravel on the exit of paddock. So yeah, lots of variables today, but feeling all right about it. Just really excited.
So Sam heading out to start off the 30-minute qualifying session, and he had quite a challenge ahead of him as we'd headed out on the dry tyres, and as you can see, not exactly the right conditions for those kind of tyres. So Sam was third in the queue in the assembly area to get out on circuit. Thankfully someone pulled off in front of him in the pits, and then he's just overtaken that yellow Fiesta there. So Sam's now at the front of the pack, and his objective was to try and get round on the outlap as quickly as possible and then be able to set the fastest lap time possible on his first flying lap, because the rain had started coming down earlier than a lot of people had expected, so we weren't the only ones caught out that were on dry tyres. So it meant that the quickest the track was going to be was at the beginning of the session. So tough job for Sam, as he had to find out the grip levels in a very short time frame. Yes, of course he's used to this car. He's in his 4th season of racing here, so he's not a novice by any stretch, and he knows his car very well, but that's not taking anything away from these conditions being very tricky. Now if you see him reaching towards the dashboard at the moment, he's just setting up the lap timer. Slightly compromised his line down the pit straight, but it was so he could get a relative understanding for his pace. And yeah, this lap just didn't really come together, unfortunately, so this was his best opportunity to get the quickest flying lap of the session, but unfortunately there were still cars coming out of the pits, and I could see it when I was standing in the pit lane that he was going to get caught out by this. So Sam didn't get a clean lap in, unfortunately, but this was still the quickest lap that he set of his part of qualifying anyway. So Sam sort of taking a bit of a dry line and then realising that's not working, so getting huge amounts of oversteer on the exit of Graham Hill Bend there. Now I didn't see what he was doing in terms of his lines around the circuit, because I was the other side of the pit garages, so all I could see was what was on the pit straight. But yeah, you can see the amount of traffic here, so the fact that this was his quickest lap and it's through this much traffic really shows you how bad traffic can be around Brands Hatch Indy on a qualifying session. There were 34 cars in this event. The visibility is completely non-existent there. Like, you can see the rain light on the back of Matt Nossiter's car there, but you can barely see the MX-5 that's further up ahead. Actually, I stand corrected, it's an MR2, so thus proving my point how bad the visibility is. But yeah, that was Sam's best lap of the session. Unfortunately, he was stuck in traffic for other parts of the session, so did not manage to improve on his time. But it's still valuable track time for him. Yes, on the wrong tyres, but we didn't know if we were potentially going to be racing on these tyres still. It was just going to depend on what the weather was doing later on. Managing to get through Graham Hill Bend a lot more controlled that time, so already making improvements on his driving for these conditions. And unfortunately, he just oversteps the marks here, so massive amounts of oversteer going through Surtees. So taking the best route, which was not the circuit, but a little bit of rallycross. No harm in that, and actually I didn't even notice that he'd done this until he told me at the end of the session, and I had a look at the front split, which was covered in grass bits, but thankfully no harm done to the car, and he just had a pretty smooth rest of the session as it goes. Still caught up in traffic, so no improvement on lap time, but at least no other code brown moments. So I've cut forwards about a lap and a half here, because this is Sam finishing off his stint in qualifying because he's done his 3 flying laps now and coming into the pits. So what was important for us about this pit stop, even though it's in qualifying, is we needed to try and find out how long it took us to get down the pit lane. So the minimum pit stop time in Trackday Trophy is 2.5 minutes. So Sam's just set the high-tech pasta timer that he's got on the dashboard there on to count how long our pit stop is. So from the moment that we enter the pit lane to the moment that we leave, the minimum time is 2.5 minutes. So it doesn't matter how fast we go down the pit lane or how long it takes us to change over necessarily, as long as we don't take any longer than 2.5 minutes. Otherwise, it's a tactical disadvantage in the race. So this is me just ready to go out, having changed over, buckled in and whatnot. It should be easy to get away from the pit stop, but you can see how much of a mare I made of this. I'm kind of glad that I did this in qualifying and not the race, however, as much as I was a pleb and managed to stall it twice there. As it goes, Sam had a different clutch and gearbox since the last race that I did with him in August, and we discussed this already, so I was aware of it, but I didn't appreciate just how low the biting point was on this clutch compared to when I previously drove it at Alton Park, so just had not established any sense of muscle memory for that, and well, yeah, I stalled it twice, didn't I? So bit of a pleb for doing that, but qualifying's a better time to get that done than in the race. I mean, ideally, I would have made that sort of screw up in testing, but yeah, we had no testing, unfortunately, just because we weren't available for it as it goes. So yeah, first ever lap in a race event or qualifying session for me in wet conditions on the wrong tyres, with Sam's advice lingering of go out there and survive is pretty much what he said. So for me, I wasn't thinking of this as a qualifying session, especially because on paper Sam's first lap was probably going to be the quickest that we set of the session. So for me, I literally just decided to treat this qualifying session as a practice session and ultimately just try and build up pace throughout the session, accepting that I wasn't going to go faster than Sam because the track was in much worse condition than when he went out to begin with. What I didn't expect is to actually go quicker. So this happens in a few laps' time once I built up a bit of confidence, but I just didn't encounter as much traffic as Sam did. So that's the single biggest difference that you can find, I would say, at Brands Indy when you're qualifying, is just getting a clear lap in. It makes such a profound difference to the lap time, just getting held up by other cars. Now, I had a rough idea for what lines I was going to be taking around the circuit. I didn't try the dry line just because I could feel how wet it was even offline, so I figured that it was just pointless trying the dry line to see how much more slippery it was and potentially if it would be quicker. Reason for that being is that I have driven Brands Indy in the wet before on a car that was on extremely the wrong setup, sort of like Sam's was for this session. So I drove a Ginetta G40 and G40 Cup setup with Michael Crease next to me back in February 2019, which was also running on semi-slicks, and it was on an extremely stiff setup, so it was not complementary to wet conditions at all. So this kind of felt familiar, to be honest, running around in Sam's car at the moment, but I'll talk you through what I felt through my experience of this wet lap of Brands. So what I found is braking into paddock needed to be delicate and quite early, but actually taking a relatively normalish dry line, getting to the insides just after the normal apex would be, actually felt alright. And a similar thing can be said of Druids. There was actually a decent amount of grip to be had on the inside line, but not washing out too wide on the exit because, yeah, that was oversteer central. Now there's some running water coming across in the braking zone on the way to Graham Hill Bend, so that's really treacherous when you're on the wrong tyres. And making sure that I was on very much a karting line round the outside of Graham Hill Bend because there was definitely a lot more grip out there. Same approach for Surtees, going round the outside-ish. The car's actually washing out a bit there, understeering just because it was aquaplaning mildly. And again, for me, I found clearways around the outside was a lot more stable. When the dry line kind of merges back here, then it was super duper slippery, but it was the best compromise I found. I saw a couple of guys taking predominantly an inside line through clearways who were in front-wheel drive cars, and I could see that working for them, but it just didn't feel like it was for me, being in Sam's rear-wheel drive BMW. So I've skipped to the end of that lap because we're now coming on to the best lap that I set in qualifying, and I'm going to stop talking in a sec and we can just watch this, but all I'll say is that I was compromised going into paddock, but otherwise the rest of the lap was clear. So we'll see what happens. So that's pretty much the end of the lap by that point, because it's just a straight shot to the start-finish line, which was good enough for 9th on the grid with a 1 minute 9.604. It was really tight with a lot of the other cars around us by the end of qualifying. So 6th place down to 12th was covered by less than a second. The pole lap was almightily fast. It was a 1 minute 5.5, which was 2.6 seconds quicker than anyone else. So I get the impression that they were probably on wet tyres where other people weren't. I'm just going to splice this in here as a quick note to everyone as well, because of the Mini on the outside of the circuit, I decided to take a more conventional line through here, and you can see just how slippery it was when you're on the normal dry line. So hence, when you're on the wrong tyres in this situation, yes, definitely a better idea to be well offline if you want the security of, well, predictable grip, I think we can call it. Now, at this point of the session, I was still running around just trying to find a consistency in the way that I drove around the circuit, not looking for outright lap time, just trying to use it as a test session still, and unfortunately qualifying then had to end early. You might have just seen the flashing yellow light on the digiboard. That's because someone had gone off the paddock. Did you see them? I bet you didn't. So, we'll rewatch it. Yeah, that happened. So, thankfully, driver was okay. I think it's fair to say the car wasn't. But, yeah, you can see the red flag that's been put out at Druids now. So, I think that was immediately obvious when I saw that the car was rolled over. That was going to need a bit more attention than just throwing a local yellow or bringing out the safety car during qualifying. So, that was the end to it for us. We elected not to go out again, just because I felt that I'd learnt what I needed to from the session. And even though I went into the pits and Sam told me that I'd actually gone a fair bit quicker than him, so Sam's best lap on the first lap of qualifying was a 1 minute 11 something, so I'd gone a lot quicker. I just didn't feel like there was any more pace that I could have found out there. The only way it would have happened is if I'd have got a clean lap in, but, well, what are the chances of that happening around Brands Indy? So I was outside for about 5 minutes then, when it wasn't raining, and now it's absolutely hammering it down again, but we knew this was going to happen, to be fair. So we qualified 9th, which is okay. We were hoping to be a bit higher up, but given the circumstances and the fact that we weren't on the wet tyres, then that's fine with us as it goes. Because hopefully then if there's any, I mean, I don't want to say it because it'll jinx it, but I'm thinking it's risk management says us being in 9th and not further back hopefully means we'll stay out of trouble at the start. Sam is starting the race, and we're going to play our tactics by the safety car basically. So if there's a safety car between 15 to 30 minutes, then Sam's just going to pit ASAP basically, and I'll get as much of the race as possible. We're still not sure what tyres we're going to be on for the race because, like, yeah, it's raining considerably at the moment, but the rain started earlier than we thought it was going to, and the most recent weather forecast says that it's going to be done sometime between 1 and 2 o'clock. So
we'll have to see about what tyres we have on.
What's the conditions going to be for the race, mate?
There will be some.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you there will be some conditions. What they are,
Yeah.
my clue. It was biblical in qualifying, and it is now. But then it looks like it brightens and the forecast says maybe not. So I'll have to dry tyres on.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the last lap there in that race?
The fastest or the last?
The fastest.
The fastest was a 1 minute point 8.
And the last?
Roughly 1 minute 1, mid 1 minute 1s. And that's from the leader. Everyone else was 1 minute 2s pretty much, or below.
Okay.
Have a good one, dudes.
Right, so as we joined Sam heading onto the grid, a question got answered which was going to quite radically change the start, which was that there was no green flag lap, as you can see being held up by that marshal with the board there. So for us that was actually an advantage. What we realised when we got to the assembly area was that we'd chosen to go on our wet tyres. We left this decision as late as possible until about 2 o'clock, which was an hour before the race, roughly half an hour until we needed to be in the assembly area. But what that meant was that there wasn't any chance for the other cars on their dry tyres, which was most of them, to be able to really warm their tyres that much before the start of the race. So we knew that that was going to put Sam in a pretty good position to launch off the line and hopefully make up some places from the start. Yes, Sam! Oh, we got boxed in! So as you can see, Sam gets an absolutely rocket start and sadly, as I said, gets boxed in. It's a massive shame considering how well he got off the line, but it's just one of those things, massive amounts of traffic around. Some other people gaining really well on the first lap, it has to be said. You might have seen this guy in the red Peugeot just steam ahead. He actually came through from grid 15, so fair play to you, James, for that. So, very congested first lap, and you might have seen there was a car off to the left there in the gravel at the exit of Druids. That was actually the pole sitter. So, big news early on, the pole sitter went straight into the second corner and binned it, and that was race over for them, despite them setting a pole lap that was 2 and a bit seconds quicker than everyone else. Anyway, very busy through the first lap. I have to say, if I'd have been in this position, I can't know how I would react, because my start at Alton Park was pretty calm to say the least compared to this, but hey, that's what you get when you're starting down in 9th place. Now if we have a little look further ahead, there's a black Mazda, that just starts spinning round here. Now really fortunate that everyone managed to avoid them, Sam included. It meant that Sam had to back off slightly while going down the pit straight, meant that he was somewhat compromised on this lap, but we got round in one piece, that's the main thing. What was most noticeable, unfortunately, was that we dropped down a few positions. So Sam actually went down to 13th at one point on that lap, managed to make his way back up to 11th by the end of the lap, but it meant that we hadn't got the strongest start that we were hoping for, especially considering how rocket a start he got. Just getting boxed in is one of those things. So I've just fast forwarded to the end of the lap because Sam didn't overtake anyone, but then he also didn't get overtaken himself. He just held track position. Still testing out grip limits. As you can see, very slippy under braking to paddock. This is the third lap of the race now, and there's a local yellow out at Druids because of the Integra that went off on the first lap, which means no overtaking. Now, someone tell me what the problem was with what you just saw. What was good is just Sam obviously obeys the flag signal. It's a shame because it meant that it removed a really strong overtaking spot for him. Sam's BMW is fantastic on its brakes, so that's a big advantage for us compared to a lot of the other cars. But yeah, you see the blue Clio up the road? Skipping forward to the lap, and you can see there's been a bit of shuffling of the cars ahead. The blue Clio's disappeared up the road just a little. Two Fiestas having a battle, and you can really see the difference in the amount of speed you can carry on the wet line in these conditions with that orange Fiesta there, which is great. So with the other Fiesta, the multicoloured one in front, not working for that car going on the inside line there, getting a bit of a kick of oversteer mid-corner. That opens up the opportunity for Sam to overtake on the inside going on the pit straight. Thankfully, it wasn't as slippy as it was in qualifying. A, because we were on the wet tyres, and B, it was just not as wet on circuit anyway. So it meant that taking the dry line on the pit straight wasn't as utterly treacherous as it was earlier on in the day. Sam getting a decent run on the orange Fiesta here, trying to overtake on the outside, but thing is, the grip on the inside of Druids was half decent, so it meant that he couldn't quite hang it around the outside. But it's the braking capability again, so Sam managing to get past on the inside of Graham Hill and managing to keep it neat, which is really good considering how slippy, like insanely slippery it is on the inside of Graham Hill Bend. After a few laps of having to deal with overtaking some back markers and thankfully no further yellow flags around the circuit, Sam's really found his pace now, and you can see the difference with the blue Clio ahead that he's been chasing for a few laps. Nice and strong on the brakes into Druids, managing to find a bit more traction on turning now. The circuit's definitely just starting to dry a little more, and you can really see the difference in braking performance going down to Graham Hill Bend. This was something that was going to really help me out later on as well, but just in all parts of the circuit, Sam's just finding far more traction in the blue Clio and pulling off a decent overtake. Fast forwarded about 5 minutes and you can see that Sam's closed up on a bunch of cars ahead. These are for position, which is very good news. So Sam's been putting in several consistent laps at a slightly higher pace than the guys ahead. So we have 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th place ahead in this group. And because they've been racing each other... because they've been racing each other pretty closely, I think they've just been holding each other up in general. Like the grey and red 306 you can see ahead, they were in 2nd place for quite a long time. So I think with part of the group bunching up there, with that 306 gradually falling back a little bit, has brought everyone into play within Sam's grasp, which is excellent. So he's about to gain a position here, but not in the way that you might think. There's no easier way to gain a position than when a car pits ahead of you. Now, that doesn't really change anything in the grand scheme of things because they're just taking their pit stop earlier. It could work out about the same by the time we've had our pit stop. However, Sam did manage to overtake another car down the inside just there, later on the brakes slightly and managing to hang them out dry. Great overtake if I can say so. And that puts Sam up into 5th place. A couple of laps later and Sam is really pressuring the 306 ahead for 4th place, but I think he got the idea with the hazards being on there that the 306 was headed for the pits. So it just seems that clearly this BMW is so intimidating, people cannot hack being overtaken by it and have to pit. So in a nice and easy fashion, Sam is up to 4th place. And 2 laps following that, Sam had gone down the pit straight with his indicator on to clearly show me that he was coming into pit this lap. And you might have seen him just reaching down to a button which turns the cooling fan on as well. The car wouldn't have been running that hot on this day, but considering we were still going to be in the pits for 2.5 minutes, it's not a fantastic environment for the car to, yeah, it just kind of cooks itself really. So it's not a great place to be for the car if it's running hot already. Thankfully, with the rain and the therefore reduced pace that we were running at, it was much easier on the car in that case. So pretty much 2.5 minutes after Sam entered the pit lane, I've got myself buckled in and good to go. Thankfully not stalling the car as I pulled away. Now, the pit stop could have gone a bit smoother, so we didn't get out in exactly 2.5 minutes. I think it was something like 2 minutes 32 or 3, I can't remember exactly, but we lost a little bit of time in the pits, but as it turned out, so did a lot of the other drivers, so it didn't really lose us any time compared to most of the other teams around us. So for me right now, onto a slightly different condition circuit to what I was driving in qualifying, but on wet tyres instead of dry. Still finding out the limits of the grip very quickly, but even just through the first few corners I could feel how much more predictable and gradual the overstepping the grip limit was on these tyres. It was pretty snappy oversteer when I was running on the dry tyres earlier on, but immediately through Surtees there, I could feel there was a heck of a lot more grip. Still getting a bit of oversteer under braking there just because I was locking the rear axle through not very smooth down changes. Still getting a fair amount of oversteer through the exit of clearways, but the overall lap time was so much quicker than when I was running in qualifying. So even straight out of the pits, I was running in 1 minute 6s, which was about 3 seconds a lap quicker than what I was doing in quali. And with the white and yellow Celica that had just pitted, along with the grey and red Peugeot that we'd managed to jump during the pit stop phase, I was now back into 5th place. Now jumping forwards another lap in a little bit, I knew I was closing up to a bunch of cars fairly quickly, but I wasn't sure who was for position and who was for a back marker. So for example there, Matt Nossiter getting out of the way really considerately, following the blue flags immediately, which was great, so I knew that I was lapping him. With this black Fiesta, I couldn't be too sure, but when I started realising how much of a pace difference I had between some of these cars, that helped me figure out who was likely to be a back marker and who was possibly for position. So thankfully managed to carve my way through these back markers pretty swiftly without getting held up. I noticed from some of the other cars ahead they were getting really held up trying to overtake some back markers, so it's important to try and get past as swiftly as you can, just because I was making up so much ground on the drivers who I was chasing down for position, who, if you see the black and green Peugeot of Jonathan Candler just going through Graham Hill Bend now, that was the next person on the road for position. So I've jumped forwards another lap. Jonathan Candler in the black and green 306 has managed to make his way up to 3rd place, and now I've got James Wilson in front in that red 206, getting very sideways on the way into clearways there, but not being too much of a crazy drift though. Just toying with the oversteer constantly through the corners, but I was very much driving by the seat of my pants, as Sam would have described it. Just giving him the thumbs up there to let him know that I'm happy with how things are going and everything's alright. But now very much on the back of James, who's in 4th place, and we've just seen someone go off into the gravel on paddock, so we know there's going to be a safety car near enough, and I think that just caught James unaware, so he wasn't looking in his mirrors at this point, and being honest, it made it really straightforward for me to just brake a little bit later and go sailing up the inside of Druids. So, through to 4th place, and with 3rd only just ahead in the form of that green-black 306. So, still a few back markers to try and get around. Thankfully, blue flags being shown from a lot of marshals posts at the right cars, so very impressed with the blue flags from the marshals, to be fair, throughout the whole race. But you might have just seen there on the left-hand side, safety car board thrown out on the digiboard, and well, that was to be expected really, because we saw the car beached in the gravel at Paddock Hill, so that neutralised the race for the next 5 laps. Now, I had lingering in the back of my head going into this safety car restart how much I kind of screwed it up at Alton Park. I was far too passive on the safety car restart when I was in 3rd place at Alton, and I didn't expect the safety car to just clear off quite as quickly as it did. So I made sure that I was really hot onto the back of Jonathan Candler at this restart, and I was watching the Silver Civic ahead in 1st place just to see when he was going to bolt, and that was my cue just there. Now, I felt like I got a really good run around the outside here. You're not allowed to overtake until the start-finish line, obviously, but Jonathan just ran wide, so I decided to back off a little bit to give him space. But this is more like it in terms of the run I'm getting on the safety car restart. So immediately overtaking a back marker just over the line. They had really good pace around the outside, actually. It's fair play, because they're in a D-class car, which is on paper a lot less powerful than Sam's BMW. Doesn't necessarily mean it's slow round corners though, as you can see. But thankfully managing to dispatch those 2 back markers pretty swiftly, and that meant I could crack on chasing down Jonathan for 3rd. Now, I realised how much stronger I was under braking at this later stage of the race just then, so I could see how much later I was able to brake and try and get it stopped and turned on the outside of Graham Hill. Nearly got a run on Jonathan coming up to Surtees there, deciding to take a wide line to see what the grip was like, and seeing immediately that actually the circuit's a fair bit drier on the dry line now. So you can see Jonathan taking the inside line there. I decided to stick it around the outside. Thankfully, managed to get a pretty good run, even though it was slightly sideways. And this is where it got well exciting. So this is what I came to do this race for. It wasn't door to door per se, but it was damn close. Really late on the brakes going into paddock, and honestly, I did not know if I was going to get it stopped in time. So I just shouted grip because I was just really hoping it would work, and amazingly pulled off an overtake around the outside of paddocks. I was absolutely buzzing after this, and furthermore, you can see first and second place just ahead on the road. Bit of an oversteer moment coming out of Druid, so I knew that I needed to try and cool myself down a little bit and still drive precisely and quickly if I could. But seeing first and second only just up the road, thanks to the safety car bunching us back together, man, that really fueled me up to give it some. Maybe giving it a little too much through 30s on this lap, but managing to hold it thankfully. And then if you could see there, a slight gearing issue, so unfortunately that was a precursor for what was about to happen on the next lap. Now I've managed to close up a little closer to, I think it's Sam who was driving in the Silver Civic ahead. Now I took it a lot easier through 30s that time, much neater. I see Sam have a massive kick of oversteer here, but I just couldn't get the damn thing in gear. Yeah, got a little bit annoyed, I think it's fair to say, but it cost me third place, so yeah, that was gutting, honestly. I've never got annoyed when I've been driving like this before, but I was angry off the back of this. I don't know whether that was a good or a bad thing, but I went quicker after this, I'll tell you that. I've skipped forwards to the end of the next lap, thankfully managing to get through clearways by double declutching this time, and that prevented any further gearing issues. But making a real mare of going up the pit straight this time, so not through oversteer, but watch this. Yeah, so that honestly didn't feel like that much of a moment, but I did put it in second, which is not a grand idea to do, and you can see, good. So James got a really good run on me down the straight. Thankfully, I managed to just outbrake him, got on a little bit of the curb on the inside, which actually had a surprising amount of grip, and kept the defensive line going up into Druids. Thankfully, managed to hold off James and stay in fourth place at this point, which was, well, yeah, quite relieving to say the least, because I really wanted to get third place back, so it got me going again, and as you can see, closing up on Jonathan Canada really quickly in the braking zone again there. So priority was just trying to get back into a podium position. What I didn't know at this point is that there was actually only going to be another 2 racing laps following the end of this lap. So in my head, I don't know, I guess I just thought that there was any unlimited amount of time left on the race, but I just wanted to try and make positions as quick as I could. So not getting the best run out of clearways again, but still within relative touching distance of Jonathan in the Peugeot ahead, and then Sam in the Silver Civic just a little bit further up the road. Noticing how much stronger I was on the brakes going into paddock that time. A little bit of oversteer on the way in, but it just helps the car rotate into the corner. Seeing Jonathan was taking an inside line, so I thought I'd send it up the outside so I could brake a little bit later still. Not finding as much grip on the outside as I hoped, seeing as the track conditions were somewhat different to earlier. And then Jonathan not getting the best run past that back marker, braking somewhat early into Graham Hill Bend. And then I just got better traction on the exit. And it was close, he squeezed me here. But I just thought, you know what, screw it, I'm going to go for it. And it worked! Yes! So, you can tell I'm just really excited watching this back still. But honestly, I don't look it because I'm kind of busy concentrating. But in the car, it was genuinely a tingling feeling. That sounds really weird. Really weird. But you know what I'm saying? I was properly, pumped on adrenaline here. Not knowing as well that this was the last lap of the race, but all I knew is I could see the Silver Civic ahead, and I was just going to close in as quick as I could, so I absolutely sent it down the inside of that back marker, and really not that far off the back of Sam now. Again, I didn't know this was the last lap, so I wasn't thinking that I was going to be a last lap hero and try and pull a stupid overtake on him. I was just thinking if I could overtake him at some point, and I would size myself up for that in the best way I could. Really strong on the brakes compared to him. down to Graham Hill like I have been on some of the other front-wheel drive cars. I was going to try and cut back, but he covered the middle of the road there, so I wasn't able to accelerate as much as I hoped. And then seeing Sam taking a much deeper line into Graham Hill Bend, and he just gaps me a little bit, which unfortunately means that I don't get the run I wanted. Now, if you have a look in the rear view, you might see Jonathan Candler on my inside here, and I noticed him in my mirror as well, which put me off a little bit, hence I got a massive slap of oversteer. And unfortunately, I then saw the checkered flag out. Put my thumb up because I was still happy with how the race had gone. And I wasn't 100% sure if I was in third at this point. I decided to not celebrate too much because I wanted to double check in case there had been, I don't know, like any penalties for any reason or if anything had changed. So I was going to wait to see what Sam said when I came back into the pitch. Just giving Jonathan the thumbs up there because I really enjoyed racing against him. Massive respect to him. It was properly close but completely fair. Had such a good time with that. Also decided that I was going to try and wave to every single marshal that I saw on the way in, just to make the most of the experience. But also, they do such an important job. We wouldn't be able to go racing without them, so it's well worth saying that, like, you got to really pay a lot of respect to the marshals. And the nice thing is, they wave back at you as well. So I actually felt like a bit of a connection on the way in, which is really nice. But seriously, they did such a spot-on job with the flag waving in the race. And I say from experience of other races that I've done that it doesn't always work out to be completely accurate. So fair play to everyone that was involved on this race day. Seriously, good job, guys.
Yeah, boy! Yeah! Woo!
You were in this.
How did we get on?
I think we did alright.
Do you think we did alright?
I think so, yeah.
We started 9th, and after a seriously messy start where essentially I got a really good launch, and unfortunately no one in front of me actually started the race.
Yeah, Rocket Man got boxed in.
I just got completely pinned. Lost a load of time there, and I ended up, I think, 14th after the first lap, but we fought back up to 6th. I think we exited the pits after Rob came out in 5th because we did okay in the pit stop despite a bit of a mess getting the car cleaned and sorted and going.
Okay.
And then Rob quickly converted it into 4th, and then in the dying minutes of the race after a short safety car, 3rd. We are on the podium overall.
Again.
From 2 hits, Rob's done 2 races. He's got a pop both times.
How about that?
And I think, in fact, I have to check the timesheets, but he has gone quicker than me both times as well. So you're not allowed back now, mate. That's it. I'm sorry.
And that rounds off what was an absolutely amazing day again. I've got to say a massive thanks to Sam. It was such an enjoyable day with him, as it was at Alton Park. We managed to score another podium. Yes! Also, big thanks to Alexi for coming down from Thunderwood Racing to support us and providing these magnificent photos again. I look forward to racing again next year. That's it for me in 2020. But I will be releasing my racing plans eventually. I'll keep you posted on social media. Until then, stay well, and I'll see you again soon.